September 12, 1942, Guadalcanal. 800 U.S. Marines confronted a tactical nightmare that ought to have supposed sure death. Lieutenant Colonel Crimson Mike Edson acquired intelligence that 2,500 Eastern troops were transferring through the jungle to surround his position on the ridge south of Henderson area. Each Navy guide stated the same element. When outnumbered 3-1 and dealing with encirclement, you retreat. You locate higher ground, you call for reinforcements. Edson looked at his Marines exhausted low on ammunition with nowhere to run and made a decision that rejected the whole thing the textbooks taught. He ordered his men to tighten their perimeter. Allow the enemy come closer. Let them surround the Marines absolutely. Through the humid darkness of the Pacific jungle, Jap forces closed in from three aspects, anticipating to weigh down the individuals in a devastating nighttime assault. What happened subsequent could shatter each assumption, approximately protecting war and turn a hopeless situation into one of the maximum lopsided victories in Marine Corps records. The humid air of Guadalcanal's jungle pressed in opposition to the Marines like a receding aspect as darkness settled over the ridge on September 13th. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson moved through his shielding positions with the measured steps of a man who had already every day the arithmetic of death. 800 Marines, 2,500 Eastern troops affirm moving via the jungle below. The numbers didn't lie. However, Edson had discovered long ago that numbers not often told the complete story. The ridge itself became barely worthy of the call. A low spine of coral and volcanic rock that rose perhaps 60 feet above the encompassing jungle, stretching roughly 1,000 yards in a north-south route. To Army strategists reading maps in Washington, it regarded insignificant. To the Marines digging in along its slopes, it represented the thin line between American manage of Henderson Field and whole catastrophe within the Pacific. The aerostrip lay simply 800 wide to the north, near sufficient that they might pay attention the occasional drone of plane engines setting out inside the pre-sunrise darkness. Edson had placed his forces with the calculated precision of a chess grasp playing for his life. The primary Raider Battalion held the northern phase of the ridge closest to Henderson discipline, even as the primary Parachute Battalion stretched along the southern processes. Among them, they commanded overlapping fields of hearth across the jungle strategies. However, Edson knew that firepower alone would not shop them. The Japanese had established time and again that they could take in horrific casualties to obtain their goals. And foremost well-known Coyote Kawaguchi had 3 times their numbers moving through the darkness. The Marines have been combating on Guadalcanal for over a month, and the jungle had already taught them lessons that no training guide ought to bring. The oppressive humidity turned each piece of metallic sizzling hot for the duration of the day and slick with condensation at night. Canvas rotted inside weeks, meals spoiled within days. Men lost weight they couldn't come up with the money for to lose, and evolved tropical illnesses that sapped their energy. But they'd additionally learned to use the jungle's atypical acoustics to their gain, listening for the subtle sounds that betrayed enemy movement through the dense undergrowth. As Edson checked his positions, he determined Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone adjusting the traverse mechanism on his Browning M1917 device gun. The weapon became a relic from the previous conflict, water-cooled and weighing 41 lbs without its tripod, but it may sustain a price of fire that would shred human flesh at tiers up to 500 waters. Bologna had already verified his worth in preceding engagements, showing the type of constant competence underneath fireplace that separated seasoned Marines from the replacements still coming back from the States. "How's your ammunition state of affairs, Gunny?" Edson asked, crouching beside the gadget gun roll sufficient to cause them to suppose 2 times about developing this hill. Colonel Basilone answered, his voice sporting the quiet confidence that Edson had discovered to depend upon. "Though I would not thoughts having a few extra belts if the Japanese decide to get critical approximately this. Non-public First Magnificence Robert Mard become dug in 20 yards to Basilone's left. His Springfield rifle wiped clean and loaded bayonet constant." The younger Marine had arrived on Guadalcanal slightly 3 weeks earlier, nonetheless carrying the gentle look of stateside education camps. But the jungle had already all started its transformation. His uniform hung free on his frame, and his eyes held the precise alertness that got here from knowing that death may want to arrive without caution from any route. The Japanese method, as Edson understood it from intelligence reviews and captured documents, relied on speed and surprise. Kawaguchi's forces were transferring through the jungle for 3 days, following trails that handiest the most skilled courses ought to navigate in daylight hours. Their plan called for a coordinated nighttime attack from 3 guidelines designed to weigh down the Yank positions through sheer weight of numbers and the psychological impact of combating in entire darkness. What the Japanese hadn't expected became the protective practice that Edson had applied over the previous week. Each method to the ridge have been studied, measured, and pre-registered for artillery fireplace. The Marines had cleared fields of hearth via the jungle undergrowth, growing killing zones that could channel attacking forces into predetermined corridors. Wire obstacles, even though limited with the aid of deliver shortages, had been placed to gradual and funnel enemy troops into the only engagement stages. The Marines also possessed advantages that would not seem on any intelligence report that Kawaguchi may have acquired. Their schooling emphasized person initiative and adaptability characteristics that proved valuable inside the chaos of night fight. In contrast to their Eastern opposite numbers, who relied closely on coordinated institution methods, American Marines had been taught to combat successfully as people whilst larger formations broke down under fireplace. Because the nighttime deepened, the sounds of the jungle began to change. The normal chorus of insects and nocturnal animals step by step gave manner to an unnatural silence that every skilled Marine diagnosed as the prelude to touch. Someplace inside the darkness under the ridge, hundreds of Jap soldiers were stepping into function, their presence creating a disturbance that even the jungle flora and fauna could feel. Edson made his very last rounds through the protecting positions, talking quietly with squad leaders and checking ammunition supplies. The Marines had about 200 rounds per rifleman, supplemented by using grenades, mortars, and the gadget weapons that might function the backbone in their defense. It wasn't an abundance, however it was sufficient for men who had discovered to make every shot depend. The colonel's radio crackled with reports from observation posts scattered through the jungle. Eastern forces had been spotted moving along 3 separate processes, confirming the intelligence estimates of a multi-pronged assault. The enemy become near enough now that character voices may want to from time to time be heard through the undergrowth, speaking inside the clipped syllables of Japanese army instructions. At 11:45, the primary Jap mortar rounds commenced falling at the ridge. The explosions have been scattered and poorly coordinated, suggesting that Kawaguchi's forces were nevertheless moving into role and trying to sign up their indirect fire guns. But the shelling served its supposed mental reason, pronouncing to the Marines that the warfare they have been waiting for becoming the end about to begin. Edson took his role on the command publish, a shallow melancholy covered by means of sandbags and placed at the highest factor of the ridge. From this vantage point, he could study the complete duration of his shielding line and maintain radio touch with Henderson discipline. The Aerostrip's artillery batteries were standing by way of to provide support, their weapons already loaded and trained on predetermined goal regions. The jungle erupted into chaos as the first wave of Eastern infantry emerged from the treeline, their warfare cries echoing across the ridge as they charged towards the Marine positions. The actual take a look at turned into about to begin. The primary wave of Eastern infantry broke from the jungle like a human avalanche. Their voices raised in the traditional bonsai cry that had terrorized Allied forces throughout the Pacific. However, as they charged up the slopes of the ridge, they encountered something that primary widespread Kawaguchi had now not anticipated in his tactical planning. The Marines failed to damage. They failed to retreat. As an alternative, they opened fire with a disciplined precision that turned the hillside right into a slaughter area. Baselan's gadget gun commenced its deadly work at 800 yards. the heavy slugs from the Browning reducing through the advancing Jap like a scythe through wheat. The weapon's water-cooled barrel allowed for sustained fire that bolt-movement rifles surely couldn't in shape, and Basilone had placed his gun to annihilate the #1 method course. Each burst dispatched 5 to 7 rounds downrange in less than 2 seconds, and at this variety, every round that determined its mark turned into lethal. The Japanese attack were planned according to standard infantry doctrine that emphasized speed and shock action. Kawaguchi's forces have been expected to close the gap to American positions, quickly the usage of darkness and overwhelming numbers to compensate for their limited firepower. However, the ridge's terrain labored against them, in methods that no quantity of pre-struggle reconnaissance may want to have revealed. The Marines had spent weeks analyzing every approach, each fold in the ground, each piece of cover that an attacking pressure would possibly use. Non-public Mard noted down his Springfield rifle and squeezed the cause, looking a Japanese soldier stumble and fall 50 yards down slope from his function. The younger Marine worked the bolt movement smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a sparkling spherical, with the mechanical performance that months of schooling had drilled into his muscle memory round him. The exceptional crack of Yankee rifles created a steady percussion that punctuated the deeper roar of the system weapons. What Kawaguchi had essentially misunderstood changed into the nature of American protective doctrine. Eastern Navy questioning emphasized the non-secular superiority of the assault, the notion that decided infantry could triumph over any impediment through sheer pressure of will. American doctrine, by way of contrast, targeted on maximizing firepower and developing interlocking fields of fireplace that would smash attacking forces before they might close to effective variety. The Marines had grew to become the ridge right into a fortress, designed to take advantage of each benefit that cutting-edge weapons may want to provide. The Japanese forces advancing up the southern processes encountered their first devastating marvel, while American mortar rounds started out falling among their ranks. The Marines had pre-plotted every probably street of technique, measuring distances and calculating firing answers at some stage in daytime when they could paintings without worry of enemy commentary. Now in the darkness, the one's calculations paid dividends as high-explosive shells detonated with deadly precision, most of the intently packed Eastern infantry. Corporal Watanabe led his squad through the undergrowth, desperately seeking cover as American bullets winded overhead and mortar fragments whistled through the jungle cover. The veteran non-commissioned officer had participated in a hit-night assaults across the Pacific. However, this was different. The Yank hearth changed into too correct, too sustained, too properly coordinated to be the fabricated from panicked defenders firing wildly into the darkness. Those Marines have been shooting with reason, and Japanese squaddies had been loss of life faster than they may advance. The tactical truth that Kaguchi became best beginning to understand have become clear as his 2D wave emerged from the jungle to find the floor beforehand of them suffering from the bodies of their comrades. The Marines had not only stopped the primary attack, but had completed so with such devastating performance that the attacking forces had been already dropping cohesion. Jap squad and platoon leaders, the experienced non-commissioned officials who held their gadgets collectively in combat, had been being systematically eliminated by way of American marksmen who had discovered to pick out targets of possibility inside the muzzle flashes and motion styles of the attacking infantry. Edson monitored the conflict from his command role, receiving reviews from his subordinate commanders, and calling in artillery aid from Henderson area. The colonel understood that this was greater than just any other Jap probe. Kawaguchi had dedicated sizable forces to this assault, and the enemy's endurance cautioned that they viewed the ridge as a critical objective. But Edson additionally identified that the Japanese were making essential mistakes in their technique, errors that his Marines had been skilled and ready to make the most. The Yank artillery batteries at Henderson Discipline were registered on predetermined target regions around the ridge. And now those weapons started out speaking with devastating effect. The 155 howitzers ought to supply excessive explosive shells with surgical precision, guided with the aid of ahead observers who had maintained verbal exchange with the gun crews at some stage in the preliminary bombardment. Every shell created a deadly radius of fragmentation that could incapacitate enemy infantry throughout a 40-yard place, and the weapons were firing at a price of 4 rounds in step with minute. Eastern techniques referred to as for infiltration and near assault. However, the terrain around the ridge provided restrained concealment for large formations. The Marines had cleared fields of fire that prolonged 300 yards in every route, creating killing zones wherein attacking forces could be uncovered to concentrated hearth from multiple positions. Even in darkness, the muzzle flashes from Eastern guns discovered their positions to American gunners who had been skilled to have interaction goals through sound and flash signature. The third Eastern attack wave encountered an excellent, more sophisticated protection, as Edson started imposing strategies that could become preferred doctrine for American forces throughout the Pacific battle. Rather than truly maintaining static positions, Marine squads commenced executing constrained counterattacks designed to disrupt Jap formations earlier than they could organize for coordinated assaults. These small unit movements, led by using skilled non-commissioned officials like Baselin, averted the enemy from organizing firing positions within effective variety of the ridge. Kawaguchi's forces discovered themselves stuck in a tactical nightmare that their education had now not organized them to handle. The Americans have been now not behaving according to the styles that Japanese intelligence had identified in preceding engagements. In preference to falling lower back under strain or breaking while subjected to decided assault, the Marines were preventing with a professional competence that became each Japanese advantage into a liability. The sustained rate of hearth that American guns should hold proved decisive because the warfare entered its second hour. Jap infantry, armed ordinarily with bolt-action rifles, determined themselves outgunned with the aid of Marines, who possessed no longer most effective advanced firepower, but also the tactical education to appoint that firepower efficaciously. The Browning machine guns, supported by using mortars and artillery, created an interlocking network of destruction that no quantity of man or woman braveness could overcome. Through nighttime, Kawaguchi's assault had misplaced all momentum. His forces scattered and disorganized across the jungle tactics to the ridge. The general confronted a choice that might define the remainder of the warfare: maintain feeding his remaining forces into what had turned out to be a killing area, or well known that his initial approach had failed, and try and develop new procedures for handling an enemy who refused to conform to Eastern expectancies of Yankee preventing capacity. The jungle fell into an eerie silence as the fourth Jap attack wave dissolved into scattered organizations of survivors crawling lower back via the undergrowth. Kawaguchi had committed over 1,500 guys to the attacks, and the ridge remained firmly in American fingers. However, the general turned into a ways from completed. Inside the pre-sunrise darkness of September 14th, he prepared to stake the whole lot on a very last coordinated attack that might either ruin the Marine defense or break what remained of his command. Edson moved via his positions, assessing ammunition materials and redistributing his forces to cover the gaps that 4 hours of continuous fight had opened in his shielding line. The Marines had finished magnificently, but they were displaying the strain of sustained movement. Private Mard had fired over 100 rounds from his Springfield extra ammunition than many Marines expended in an entire month of education. His shoulder acted from the rifle's cringe, and his palms trembled barely as he reloaded his 8 spherical clips with the aid of sense within the darkness. The colonel's biggest concern turned into ammunition for the system weapons. Baselone's crew had fired almost 3,000 rounds, changing barrels 2 times to prevent overheating regardless of the weapon's water-cooled layout. The gunny sergeant stated that he had perhaps 500 rounds remaining, enough for some other sustained engagement, but now not enough for extended warfare. Similar reviews got here from the other system gun positions scattered alongside the ridge. each crew rationing their last ammunition while preserving their sectors of hearth. Kawaguchi had found out from his in advance disasters, and his very last attack pondered a more sophisticated understanding of Yankee protecting competencies. Instead of launching mass frontal attacks that performed to Marine strengths, he divided his last forces into smaller infiltration companies, tasked with penetrating the American perimeter and attacking from more than one direction concurrently. The Japanese would sacrifice the mental effect of bonsai costs in prefer of procedures that would without a doubt be triumphant against disciplined defenders. The brand new Jap approach became obvious, whilst Marine listening posts commenced reporting movement from sectors that were quiet during the earlier assaults. Small agencies of enemy squaddies have been trying to paintings their way across the flanks of the Yankee position, the usage of ravines and dense plants to mask their method. Those infiltrators carried light weapons and grenades, making plans to get close sufficient to the Marine positions to neutralize key guns like device guns and mortars via wonder assaults. Edson replied by way of pulling his reserve forces from their positions in the back of the main protecting line and deploying them to counter the infiltration attempts. These were his most skilled marinesmen who had validated their capacity to fight effectively in small agencies without direct supervision. They moved via the jungle with the silent performance of hunters using their expertise of the terrain to intercept Eastern forces before they could attain the ridge. The combating that ensued became, unlike something inside the preceding attacks. Character Marines determined themselves engaged in close quarters fight with Eastern infantrymen who had penetrated to within 30 yards of key shielding positions. Mard heard movement inside the undergrowth to his left and became to look a Japanese infiltrator rising from concealment with a grenade in his hand. The young Marine's rifle cracked once, and the enemy soldier collapsed the grenade, rolling harmlessly down the slope to blow up a number of the trees underneath. Baseline's function got here below direct attack, whilst a Jap squad controlled to approach within grenade range of his system gun. The gunny sergeant and his group fought with pistols and rifle stocks as enemy squaddies attempted to hurricane their sandbag emplacement. One Eastern soldier truly reached the gadget gun earlier than Basilone killed him, with a burst from his personal Thompson submachine gun, the useless man's frame falling throughout the weapon's tripod. The depth of the close combat created chaos along the protecting perimeter. However, it additionally discovered the fundamental weak spot in Kawaguchi's new approach. By way of dispersing his forces into small infiltration corporations, the overall had sacrificed the mass and momentum that have been vital for step-forward operations. In place of concentrating his remaining energy in opposition to an unmarried point in the American line, he had spread his forces throughout more than one goals, permitting the Marines to defeat each institution in detail. American artillery persisted to play a decisive position, but now the weapons were firing at goals identified through forward observers who have been every now and then most effective yards far away from enemy positions. The proximity of warring parties made hearth missions extraordinarily risky, requiring cut-up-second timing and precise navigation to avoid hitting friendly forces. Shell bursts illuminated the jungle in quick hellish glimpses that discovered Jap squaddies desperately seeking cover the various twisted roots and fallen logs. The tactical scenario had developed into precisely the type of fighting that preferred American training and gadget. Marines excelled at small unit moves that required individual initiative and adaptability. Their guns had been designed for sustained fireplace and close-range accuracy. Most importantly, their doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattacks that averted enemy forces from consolidating gains or setting up firing positions. As dawn approached, the individual of the battle modified all over again. Kawaguchi's infiltration methods did not achieve step forward, and sunlight hours could divulge his ultimate forces to devastating hearth from American positions that commanded extraordinary fields of statement. The general confronted the chance of persevering with his attacks in vast daylight against defenders who had already proven their capability to inflict catastrophic casualties on his forces. The Japanese started taking flight quickly after 5 in the morning, their motion blanketed with the aid of mortar fireplace that became poorly coordinated and in large part ineffective. Marine observers watched through disciplined glasses as scattered agencies of enemy squaddies retreated through the jungle, leaving behind equipment and wounded comrades in their haste to escape the killing ground across the ridge. Edson ordered his forces to preserve their positions and avoid pursuit operations that would divulge them to ambush or lead them into prepared enemy positions. The colonel understood that his #1 undertaking changed into protective, and he had done that project with a tactical victory that surpassed all affordable expectancies. His 800 Marines had now not only held their floor against overwhelming odds, however, had truly destroyed an enemy pressure 3 times their size. The aftermath of the battle found out the actual scale of the Japanese defeat. Reconnaissance patrols counted over 700 enemy bodies at the strategies to the ridge, with many extra wounded infantrymen evacuated throughout the retreat. American casualties numbered fewer than 50 killed and wounded, a ratio that might have regarded not possible to military analysts studying the preliminary force tendencies. Kawaguchi's failure on the ridge efficiently ended Jap offensive talents on Guadalcanal and marked the start of a strategic shift that could signify the remainder of the Pacific warfare. The Iron Marines had verified that disciplined defenders with superior firepower may want to defeat numerically superior attackers regardless of their recognition for fanatical braveness. Extra importantly, that they had proven that American forces may want to adapt their methods to take advantage of enemy weaknesses at the same time as maximizing their own technological and training advantages. The ridge that could for all time bear Edson's name had come to be the graveyard of Eastern hopes for victory on Guadalcanal, and the 800 Marines who held it had tested that advanced numbers meant nothing in opposition to superior preparation, education, and management. The first rays of sunrise painted the jungle cover in sunglasses of gold, and inexperienced as Edson surveyed the battlefield that stretched under the ridge. What he noticed defied every prediction that body of workers officials had made about Jap resilience and fighting capability. Bodies lay scattered across the strategies in groupings that advised the story of each failed attack, their positions marking the excessive watermark of what had been one of the most concentrated enemy offensives within the Pacific conflict. The silence that had settled over the ridge carried a nearly supernatural excellent broken best via the distant calls of tropical birds resuming their morning workouts. Personal Mard emerged from his preventing function for the primary time in 6 hours, his legs unsteady underneath him as movement again to limbs that had remained cramped inside the identical defensive posture all through the night time. The younger Marine seemed out throughout the killing field with the hollow-eyed stare of a person who had witnessed industrialized loss of life on a scale that no training workout may want to simulate. Jap device lay deserted among the body's rifles with their exceptional lengthy bayonets, mild mortars that had by no means found their variety, and canvas packs spilling personal outcomes throughout the jungle floor. Baselon supervised the cleaning of his system guns, strolling patches through the barrel to eliminate the carbon fouling that accumulated after firing nearly 4,000 rounds. The weapon had carried out perfectly at some stage in the engagement its water-cooled design, preventing the overheating that would have rendered it useless throughout the most crucial stages of the battle. But the gunny sergeant understood that mechanical reliability supposed not anything without the tactical skill to rent guns efficiently, and he had tested that American machine gun doctrine may want to devastate attacking infantry whilst well applied. The dimensions of Japanese losses have become apparent as Marine patrols started moving via the battlefield to accumulate intelligence and check enemy casualties. Kawaguchi had devoted the equal of 3 complete battalions to his attack on the ridge, about 2,500 men, representing a number of his most skilled combat units. Of these, fewer than 800 remained able to organize resistance, and many of those have been wounded or separated from their parent gadgets all through the chaotic retreat. What made the defeat specially devastating for Japanese strategic making plans changed into the satisfactory of the forces that have been destroyed. These had been no longer uncooked recruits or second-line garrison troops, however veteran infantry who had participated in hit campaigns throughout the Pacific. Many of Kawaguchi's squaddies had fought inside the conquest of the Dutch East Indies within the Philippines, gaining combat enjoy that Eastern planners considered important for offensive operations in opposition to American forces. The lack of such experienced personnel represented a blow to Jap military functionality that prolonged far past the instant tactical state of affairs on Guadalcanal. Edson's tactical victory had implications that reached into the very best degrees of army approach on both sides of the Pacific battle. For the people, the success defense of the ridge proven that Eastern forces have been no longer invincible, that superior numbers and fanatical willpower could be conquered via expert competence and effective use of firepower. This lesson might affect American tactical doctrine throughout the rest of the war, encouraging commanders to accept as true with of their training and system, whilst facing reputedly impossible odds. The Japanese reaction to the defeat discovered fundamental weaknesses of their strategic thinking that had been masked by in-advance victories towards much less organized fighters. Kawaguchi's after-action reports blamed his failure on inadequate artillery assist and inadequate time for reconnaissance. However, these causes prevented addressing the middle hassle. Eastern infantry strategies have been designed for campaigns towards opponents who lack the firepower and tactical sophistication of Yank Marine devices, and no amount of additional guidance could have triumph over those doctrinal limitations. American intelligence officers who interrogated captured Japanese soldiers discovered that Kawaguchi's forces were advised to assume minimal resistance from demoralized American defenders, who could crumble underneath determined assault. This fundamental misreading of Marine capabilities reflected broader Jap misconceptions approximately American combating capability that would prove highly priced in the course of the Pacific warfare. The belief that Western infantrymen lacked the spiritual energy for sustained combat had been disproven inside the most decisive way possible. The strategic outcomes of the conflict extended past immediate military concerns to have an effect on the broader trajectory of the Pacific conflict. Henderson area remained in American fingers, supplying a base for air operations that might steadily strangle Eastern supply lines to their remaining forces on Guadalcanal. Without the potential to boost or resupply their positions, Eastern commanders faced the possibility of conducting a defensive marketing campaign with insufficient assets in opposition to an enemy who controlled each the ocean methods and the airspace over the island. For the Marines who had fought on the ridge, the victory furnished validation of training methods and tactical doctrines that many had questioned at some point of their months of education in the U.S. The emphasis on man or woman marksmanship, small unit strategies, and competitive use of helping guns had verified powerful against an enemy famed for military prowess. More importantly, they'd proven to themselves and to observers at some stage in the Pacific that American forces couldn't simplest suit Jap combat effectiveness, however may want to exceed it whilst well-led and equipped. The human cost of the victory, whilst tremendously mild by way of the requirements of Pacific battle, nonetheless represented irreplaceable losses for gadgets that had no immediate prospect of receiving replacements. 43 Marines had been killed during the engagement, with some other 97 wounded significantly sufficient to require scientific evacuation. Every casualty represented years of training and combat experience that couldn't be speedily replaced, highlighting the significance of tactical victories that finished strategic goals while minimizing friendly losses. Edson's private leadership during the conflict became a case examined in small unit command that would be analyzed and emulated at some stage in the Marine Corps for many years to follow. His choice to allow Jap forces to surround his position had seemed like tactical suicide to observers who lacked information of the protecting advantages that the ridge provided. Through forcing the enemy to assault uphill against prepared positions, he had maximized the effectiveness of American firepower at the same time as minimizing Jap benefits in numbers and close combat talent. The ridge that could bear Edson's call represented extra than just another tactical victory within the long war for control of the Pacific. It marked the beginning of a fundamental shift within the stability of military effectiveness that could characterize the remainder of the conflict towards Japan. American forces had tested that advanced education device and leadership ought to triumph over any benefit in numbers or combating spirit that their enemies may own. The lesson learned in the jungles of Guadalcanal might echo across each battlefield from the Solomon Islands to the shores of Japan itself, carried ahead by way of Marines who had witnessed the start of Yank tactical supremacy within the Pacific theater of operations. The radio reports flowing into Japanese headquarters during the morning of September 14th painted a photo that Kawaguchi ought to barely realize. His brigade, which had numbered over 3,000 guys while it departed its staging areas just days in advance, had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent combating pressure. Unit commanders who had maintained contact reported casualties exceeding 60%, with many organizations decreased to fewer than 20 effective infantrymen. The 35th Infantry Brigade, as soon as considered some of the maximum capable formations inside the Imperial Japanese Army, had been shattered against the ridge in an unmarried night time of combating. The survivors of the attack straggled via the jungle in small businesses, many wearing wounded comrades, who slowed their retreat and made them liable to American pursuit. Jap Army doctrine had never adequately addressed the logistics of big-scale withdrawals, assuming that victory or demise have been the best suitable outcomes for Imperial forces. Now, Kawaguchi confronted the exceptional mission of evacuating what remained of his command while preserving sufficient organizational structure to prevent whole fall apart. Captain Suzuki, certainly one of Kawaguchi's few final organization commanders, had witnessed the final assault from a head statement position that furnished clean perspectives of the American shielding line. His file to brigade headquarters defined Marine positions that maintained disciplined fireplace, while Japanese infantrymen closed to inside 20 yards in their preventing holes. The people, Suzuki noted, in no way seemed to panic or lose tactical brotherly love, responding to each Japanese thrust with coordinated counter-fireplace that eliminated attackers with mechanical precision. American intelligence officials tracking Jap radio communications detected the growing desperation in enemy transmissions as unit commanders attempted to account for his or her scattered forces. The intercepts revealed that Kawaguchi had misplaced contact with over 1-2 his subordinate gadgets, lots of which have been destroyed so absolutely that no survivors remain to record their destiny. Those units that did keep verbal exchange painted a steady picture of devastating losses and whole tactical failure. The effect of the defeat prolonged far beyond the immediately battlefield to affect Eastern strategic planning for the duration of the Solomon Islands campaign. High Command had committed Kawaguchi's brigade because the spearhead of a larger offensive, designed to recapture Henderson discipline and eliminate American air power within the place. The failure of this attack forced an essential reassessment of Jap talents and revealed that American protecting power were dramatically underestimated by means of Tokyo's army planners. For the Marines at the ridge, the significance of their victory have become clean as patrols again, with reviews of enemy equipment and casualties scattered throughout numerous square miles of jungle. The sheer extent of deserted Japanese cloth told the story of a military in complete retreat. Rifles discarded to hurry withdrawal mortars left at the back of when their crews have been killed or wounded, and private system scattered along every trail leading away from the battlefield. Intelligence experts cataloged the captured guns and files, building a comprehensive picture of Eastern tactical organization and system that would show helpful in destiny engagements. Non-public MARD accompanied one of the reconnaissance patrols that ventured past the instant perimeter to assess the quantity of Eastern losses. What he saw during that patrol would continue to be burned into his reminiscence for the rest of his life. Our bodies of enemy infantrymen lay in positions that found out the tale of each failed assault, their equipment and weapons scattered in patterns that indicated the depth of Yank shielding fireplace. Many Japanese positions confirmed proof of direct hits from artillery or mortar rounds, with entire squads removed in single explosions that left craters surrounded with the aid of debris and human remains. Baseline supervised the redistribution of ammunition from Japanese resources, examining captured rifles and system weapons to assess their abilities and potential battlefield packages. The Japanese weapons showed notable craftsmanship, but revealed layout philosophies that differed notably from American techniques. Wherein American weapons emphasized sustained hearth and mechanical reliability, Japanese designs prioritized accuracy and conservation of ammunition, reflecting exclusive tactical doctrines and production skills. The strategic implications of the war resonated through each Navy hierarchies, as senior commanders attempted to understand what had occurred at the ridge. American generals noticed validation of education applications and tactical doctrines that were evolved all through peacetime, however, by no means examined below combat conditions. The emphasis on small unit leadership, man or woman marksmanship, and coordinated use of helping weapons had validated devastatingly effective towards an enemy famed for army competence. Japanese military leaders confronted the greater hard assignment of explaining how elite infantry units have been destroyed by using a numerically inferior enemy preventing from organized positions. Conventional Eastern Navy wondering emphasized spiritual strength and aggressive strategies as the keys to victory concepts that had demonstrated inadequate in opposition to American firepower and protective information. The defeat compelled painful recognition. The technological superiority and professional schooling should overcome blessings in numbers and fighting spirit. Kawaguchi's personal destiny illustrated the wider effects of the tactical disaster. The general, who had enjoyed a recognition as certainly one of Japan's most capable subject commanders, discovered his career successfully ended via the failure on Guadalcanal. His superiors in Tokyo considered the defeat as evidence of insufficient leadership and poor tactical judgment criticisms that omitted the fundamental troubles with Eastern doctrine and strategic evaluation that had made the catastrophe inevitable. The medical aftermath of the struggle revealed additional dimensions of the Japanese defeat. American corpsmen treating wounded prisoners observed that many enemy soldiers suffered from malnutrition and tropical diseases that had substantially decreased their combat effectiveness. The Japanese logistical system stretched to its limits by prolonged deliver strains, and American air assaults had tested incapable of preventing gadgets at full power all through extended campaigns in adversarial environments. American casualties, at the same time as tragic for the families and units concerned, represented a remarkably favorable alternate ratio that confirmed tactical choices made all through the engagement. The 43 Marines killed and 97 wounded had inflicted losses on Japanese forces that passed 20-1, a ratio that meditated both the defensive blessings of the ridge and the superior effectiveness of Yankee weapons and approaches. The political ramifications of the victory prolonged beyond Army considerations to have an effect on American morale and Jap strategic calculations in the course of the Pacific. Information of the successful defense reached the USA at a time whilst public opinion remained unsure approximately American potentialities inside the Pacific battle. The Marine victory provided concrete evidence that Japanese forces could be defeated through advanced instruction and expert competence, encouraging endured help for the large military expansion that could ultimately prove decisive. The ridge that had witnessed this modification in Pacific warfare stood silent within the afternoon heat, its slopes marked by way of the debris of battle, however no longer contested via opposing forces. For the 800 Marines who had held this ground against overwhelming odds, the victory represented validation of the whole thing they had been taught, approximately war management, and the strength of disciplined squaddies combating for a reason they understood and supported.